So we are Maine Friends of Animals, and we are the largest and leading animal protection organization in the state, and we have been for over 25 years now. We just hit our 25th year last year, so that was very exciting. And our mission is to promote the humane treatment of animals through education, advocacy, and legislation. And our focus includes companion animals in the home, and then farm animals, as well as our native wildlife species here in Maine. All right. And I'll also pause for questions occasionally too. Okay. So we have a little bit of history and a long timeline to share. In 1997, Maine Friends of Animals was founded by a former legislator and longtime animal protection advocate, and his name is Robert Fisk Jr. He created Maine Friends of Animals when he realized that animals had no real voice in the Maine legislature. The initial goals were to create a statewide organization, increase public awareness of animal protection issues, and effectively engage the legislative process. Today, Maine Friends of Animals is a 9-member board and staff, and we work together with 1,800 members and supporters around the state to help move animal protection issues to the forefront in Maine legislature with the public in general. We have a lot of help from our volunteers and people that write letters to the editor. So we really thank the state and the general public for helping us. All right, so now we we work to organize and develop 2-year campaigns to educate, advocate, coordinate, and support timely legislation to protect all classes of Maine animals. We also partner with many local, statewide, and national animal protection organizations as well to create a more humane world, one act of Maine's legislature and one act of kindness at a time.
And that's something that everyone can participate in.
Yes.
If you're interested in animal welfare, you can write to your local newspaper and comment on legislation that may be happening in states other than Maine so that you become a part of the process. And just being aware of the fact that everything you do helps an animal is an act of kindness. So you can engage at many different levels, and we'll go into more of them later.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. All right, so in 1999, Maine Friends of Animals passed legislation to increase penalties for animal cruelty from a misdemeanor to a felony offense, with provisions for increased fines and imprisonment. In 2000, we revamped the animal welfare program in the state by hiring a new animal welfare program director and state veterinarian, and the creation of the Animal Welfare Advisory Council. And this was to all accelerate the response to animal cruelty around the state. In 2003, our board director and a member formed a program called Spay Maine. It's a very successful program designed to reduce cat and dog unwanted litters and euthanasia, which was later administered by the Animal Welfare Program of the state. And Jane, also feel free to pause me and expand on any of these if you want to.
Oh, sure, I will.
Okay. All right. In 2006, we passed the first in the nation legislation addressing dogs left outside 24/7 to establish greater safety and health requirements for those left outside on a continuous basis, and subsequently formed our program called Dogs Chained for Life. And that's something you're going to learn about in a later slide. All right, in 2007, we sponsored legislation, which became law in 2011, requiring that a bittering agent be added to antifreeze to help keep your engine running when it's cold. That's that liquid that sometimes you see drip out. And this was to help prevent poisoning of pets and wildlife, because sometimes the animals will lick that off the road or the driveway thinking it's water because they're thirsty, and it's very poisonous. So
It's also very sweet, so it's
it
very
is,
tempting for animals.
yeah, it has a scent that attracts them to it. So yeah, that was a big one. In 2009, we passed legislation that required specific criteria for transporting a dog in the back of a pickup truck, like in the bed where it's open. Yeah. In 2010, we developed a model called Pet Club, and this is for elementary and middle schools, teaching children about responsibility in the care and protection of companion animals. And that actually we just revamped, and we're going to be starting that program again. So that's very exciting for us. In 2011, we passed legislation to provide greater response in the types of first responders in protecting animals left unattended in vehicles if the animal's safety, health, and well-being appears to be in danger. And this is notably in the summertime when your car gets very hot, left out in the sun in a parking lot. So that's a huge one. In 2013, we passed legislation making post-conviction possession of an animal a criminal offense to increase the deterrent of repeat animal cruelty. The bill was passed in the House and the Senate, but vetoed by the governor. The legislation was reintroduced in 2018 under a new administration, and it passed. In 2015, we passed first in the nation anti-puppy mill bill, and that's to ban the sale of puppies and kittens in all pet shops in Maine. After similar legislative action as the above bill, a similar law was then passed in 2018. All right, and then in 2018, we opposed, along with the state's spay and neuter advocates, repeated attempts by the industry to roll back the pet food surcharge that supports the animal welfare program, helping get animals spayed and neutered to prevent those unwanted litters. And so particularly with that program, the most recent attempt resulted in legislators instead voting to increase the allotment. So that would help provide more funds to that program. Let's see. Oh, and then I guess I skipped one. So we had another one in 2018. Sorry, I missed that one. That was something we passed, and it was second in the nation legislation because there was already one prior to us, but it's known as Frankie's Law, and we are going to share more on this later, which provides the Maine court system the use of law students and lawyers to volunteer as advocates for justice in animal cruelty cases. So the animals have a voice. Yes, question. Allison.
Well, I know we're going to talk about some of them. I don't know if we were going to talk about the anti-puppy mill bill, but I have one question around that. If we
Sure.
do, are we going to talk? Okay.
We are
It was
we are actually going to
oh,
talk about it
oh,
later. I
okay,
forgot to mention
good.
that. Sorry, I missed that one too.
Okay. No,
But
that's okay.
okay,
And
do you want to wait?
and then yeah, and I was gonna say I did hear about the spay mane. I used that back in the day when I got my cat, and fantastic program. I'm so glad that's in place. Like it's
Oh,
so important. And I always refer people to the spay mane like
oh,
page. I'm like, go to that page, get your cat fixed. They'll help you out because spaying and neutering your animals is it, cats are expensive, as I
It's
say.
so important. There are
And it's
so
so
many
important.
unwanted animals in shelters, and
yeah.
spaying and neutering is the way to protect
Yeah,
them
we put
against
down a
that.
lot of animals, like
Mm.
110,000 dogs just a year through like the ASPCA. Like it's just, and that's just dogs. I don't even want to get talking about the
I know.
uh, yeah, I know
Oh,
I'm very passionate about this. I'm
oh,
very much advocate for animals. I've been vegan for 7 years. I'm very like trying to change every day to be better to help out. And I'm great that you guys use volunteers. This is something I will look into for sure.
oh,
Thank you.
great. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that, Allison. And I will touch on volunteers later as well. But thanks for promoting the Spay Maine program. The two women that run that are very amazing, lovely people. So thank you. All right. So, and we will talk about that one later too as well. All right. And then in 2021, we passed fifth in the nation pet custody legislation, which provides judges with criteria in the consideration of the well-being of the companion animals in the determining custody in a divorce proceeding. That one's a little complicated, but we are going to talk about that one later too. We'll touch on that. Okay. So now, okay, and Jane, I think we're ready to move into Dogs Chained for Life.
Exactly. And this is a project that came to fruition because the former office manager at Maine Friends of Animals, Susanna Richer, was very passionate about this issue. And it is an issue that's not just a winter issue, it's an issue in many states in the South when dogs are chained outside in extremes of heat, often with no food, no water, no shelter, no shade. And I am currently working on a public service announcement that hopefully you will be seeing if you live in Maine sometime in the very near future. I'm redoing a TV spot. It's a 30-second commercial that would be aired at no charge to Maine Friends of Animals as a public service announcement that will caution people about leaving their animals chained outside, especially during this very cold winter spell that we've been having. So watch for that. You'll see it on TV. But Maggie, you go on with some more details, please.
Unmute myself, of course. Okay, so all right, so we have, so for over 20 years, Maine Friends of Animals has been the national leader in addressing dogs left outside 24/7, often without adequate shelter, tethered in the same area they sleep and eat, with overturned or frozen water bowls, no veterinarian care, and little or no canine or human contact or love, which is really sad. So in 2006, Maine Friends of Animals passed precedent-setting first in the nation legislation, and that was to address these dogs that are left outside on a continuous basis. And I did link to the specific law as it reads for the state. So that's linked here. So Renee, you can share that at another time.
Definitely,
Whenever.
yeah. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah. And so Maine does have very specific requirements now regarding these dogs left outside for more than 12 hours per day. So that's the hour consideration. And so this law, along with other state animal welfare laws, can be found on the website. And again, the link is there, so you guys can check that out at some point. But it's very specific. Jane, I don't know if you want to add any details, but it kind of gets into, they must have access to shelter. They must have fresh water. Yes, Paula.
I agree. I think what they need to do, people that own them, is bring them inside and feed them with fresh food and water, but also take them to the vet to have their nails trimmed and also check their weight. Like I'm seeing in this picture, this dog looks like it's thin in bones, like starvation. And I just think when a person does that, I think they're being cruel and neglected. My mom on a neighbor's yard saw a husky that had a what is it, like a collar and chain tied up, and the owner that owned it was beating it, and it had already cuts and bruises, but the neighbor that called the cops said that that dog was thin and neglected, and so they just took it to a shelter or the vet to take care of it. But what I don't like is people chaining their dogs like that, because dogs could get a seriously bad injury around their neck, not just ropes but with chains.
Sadly, that does happen a great deal. And animals for many, many years historically have been treated as property and not as living beings that are what we call sentient or knowing beings. And it's a big problem they are still largely considered to be property. And Maine Friends of Animals and organizations across the country, like ours, have been working steadily, persistently to re engage public thinking, to think more of animals in the way we think of humans, of children, to indice better care and ensure that laws are more protective of them every single year. It's a very big problem.
It is. Yeah, Allison.
I guess my question around that kind of goes to like dogs that are used for hunting dogs and stuff, and what is considered like the adequate shelter and stuff. Like, can they be tied up 24/7, or is them going on a hunting trip considered a break from, you know what I mean, being chained up?
Mm,
I mean, there's so much that goes around it, and I think it's fantastic that you guys are steadily pushing to make this more so people are more aware and changing their ways. So, but yeah, I guess my question is around if hunting dogs are allowed to be chained up 24/7 in particular. I just curious because I see that quite often.
The law does not discriminate in terms of the functionality of the dog. If it's
Okay.
a pet or if it's a hunting dog, the law does not specify or segregate the use of the dog. Many people in the northern part of the state, and of course, this is very prevalent in Alaska, also in Minnesota and other northern states, do sled dogging. And many of those dogs are chained outside almost all the time. With certain breeds, it's less offensive, but it is still the law within the state of Maine that if it is a dog and it is chained outside 12 hours or more, these rules pertain.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a great question.
Yeah, it also kind of is kind of sad to think that, because I know people that, you know, have their dogs in their garage, and it's like, I'm like, you know, your dog's gonna get hypothermia, but just think of that. Obviously they don't care, but I'm
Yeah.
glad that there's going to be a service announcement on television for people to see, and maybe that will
Absolutely.
sink into some of those people that choose to treat their animals as such.
Yeah. It's a very good way to get the word out. So we're looking forward to bringing this back again. It is it's a regular campaign that we've had for a very long time. But it's good to bring it up every winter, especially in the state of Maine. So yeah, so what should you do if you see a dog chained for life? So you know, we just kind of talked about the law a little bit. So just knowing the law and all the little pieces of the law, because there are a lot of things to it. And that's really important. Then the second thing would be to gather information on it. So we get a lot of people that write into us saying they've seen, you know, whatever it might be, an abused animal, or, you know, something like this, a dog chained outside. So we kind of have these steps, and a lot of it has to do with gathering information. It's a lot of documentation, a lot of observation. So what you would want to do is document the neglect and any violations of the existing law that you're seeing. And you would do this in writing, but also with pictures. Pictures are very helpful. And you would want to keep record of all the communications that you might have with any authorities. So we have animal control officers in each town in the state, and they would be assisting with this sort of violation. So you'd want to have all your communication, whether that's email or phone calls, concerning the dog's welfare, because that's also very important. And then the third thing would be to contact the authorities. So that would be reporting the dog to your local animal control officer, noting specific legal infractions. So that's when you would know the law and say, well, I'm seeing this dog and it's outside for more than 12 hours and it does not have access to shelter, or it is not being brought inside, you know, for the night or whatever it may be. And you want to be sure to have the physical address of the dog when making a report. That's very important. So they know where it is. And then just providing as much detail and documentation as you possibly can. Yes, Allison.
So like in cases like that have been reported multiple times. I mean, obviously there's some way that they're loopholing around the rules and stuff. Are are there any laws that you guys are trying to pass or push towards legislation um in regards to some of those that are not in, like, laws that are not necessarily there to protect animals? Like because I know like the scenario where this hunting dogs, they were outdoors, like it was considered adequate shelter, even though I wouldn't consider it shelter, unfortunately. So yeah, I guess kind of curious on what can be pressed and passed to go even further to protect dogs and
Unfortunately, the way property law works in general, not just in the state of Maine, but across the country as a whole, it's very open-ended, and the restrictions on what constitutes adequate shelter for a dog that's chained outside are very loosely worded. Practically anything can constitute a shelter the way the law currently exists. I think there's definitely room to improve that and to make it more specific. But the fact is that people who treat their dogs this way generally do not want to spend money on the dog. Many of them, and I'm sure you've seen these in the ASPCA and Humane Society ads on TV, will use an old oil barrel as housing for the dog. Obviously, having a dog in a metal house in the dead of winter is not providing adequate shelter. And yet, many states, and to a certain extent, the state of Maine, just do not outline the specifics of what constitutes shelter. Basically, the dog has to have a roof over its head and a place to go inside. But the quality of that place isn't specified in the law and probably never will be, sadly.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And those metal barrels on the other side, very hot in the summer too. So
Extremely.
yeah.
and like you said, just a roof over your head, and that's pretty much what these animals, and like I said, it's been reported many a times, and they've tried to get them for noise complaints and stuff, because it's a sad thing to see, the mistreatment of any living thing. So yeah.
Yeah. Good question. Good points. Paula, yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering if someone sees, like, let's say there's a dog or cat that's injured, like injured in the neck or the leg, or has been having skin issues, or like their skin or ear or whatever has been burnt by something. I wonder what those people do to take the animal to the vet.
Well, they should, obviously. Unfortunately, many people don't do that either. The sad truth is that if more people were as concerned about their pets, their farm animals are often the issue of abuse and neglect as well, not to mention wildlife and the way they have been traditionally trapped and hunted for many years. If everybody cared as much as all of you do, very obviously, organizations like Maine Friends of Animals wouldn't have to exist. But not a lot of people do have that sense of care and obligation to protect and love their pets. And a lot of people just don't want to get involved if it's not their pet and they see it. So it's our job as a nonprofit to make people more aware and to make people want to help these animals when they better understand what the animal is enduring and is experiencing, in the same way we would experience cold or extremes of heat or hunger or abuse. That's our big goal, to make people understand that they feel and they respond exactly the way we do.
Well said, Jane. That was lovely. All right, I'll go on to the next slide because we have more steps we need to take for those dogs that are chained. So here's one out in the snow. Very cold. You can tell its paws are pretty cold. It's holding its paws up. So our next step would be to follow up with that animal control officer, because they have a very busy job and they are trying to patrol the entire town, or sometimes in the case of the state of Maine, they have multiple towns that they have to keep track of, and it's just one person. So they have a big job. So you definitely want to follow up with those officers to determine what the next steps they have taken to correct this neglect. So then we want to continue to monitor the situation at that point, because we're kind of waiting to see what the control officer is going to be able to do. And in the meantime, we can continue to monitor the animal. So in the instance of neglect, those are rarely resolved with one phone call. It's going to take a lot. If more humane infractions occur, you can contact the ACO again, the animal control officer. And if they are not responsive, you would then want to call the superior of that control officer, which would be the police station or the town manager, or the state animal welfare department. So you could even go as high as that. Yes, Paula.
Animals who are neglected and who are not socialized by their owners are sad. There's no question about that. And it's tragic, really, that so many, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of animals are mistreated and neglected. Neglect is a form of mistreatment. And so hopefully, by again engaging the public in the same way that we're reaching out to all of you, you can reach out to people in your community. You can do many, many things to support animal welfare wherever you live. And it does not have to take a huge amount of time. It has to take a huge amount of commitment and passion. And I can see you have that just by virtue of the questions you're asking and the observations you're making, like the one Paula just made about this poor sweet dog.
Yes, it's great. Very observant, and it's wonderful. All right, so the next thing we would want to do is engage the community. And in most of these cases, one person isn't going to be the only person that's probably concerned about the well-being of this dog, especially if it's very visible. So what you'd want to do is speak to neighbors. If there are other neighbors around, you want to speak to them about the dog. Have they seen the dog? What are they seeing? What are they hearing? Things like that. And you can ask them to get involved too in the documentation and communication with the authorities and maybe the dog owner, if that's possible. Because as many people as you have behind this, and as much detail and observation as possible, that would be the best. All right, so another thing you can do is to educate the dog owner. Maybe they just don't know, they just don't understand, they don't see how this is bad for the dog, which is hard for us to understand, right? Because we would care very much. So what you could do is send an educational letter to the owner explaining why chaining is inhumane and dangerous. And then you could also offer alternatives to the chain. So often dogs that are chained outside because they're not house trained. That's sometimes the case. So they don't understand that when they need to go to the bathroom, they need to go outside. So some owners will have the dog stay outside so that they go to the bathroom outside. Or they might be destructive in your house. They might, tear apart all that nice furniture, right? and the owner might just, consider them to be too destructive in the house. Some breeds are better outside than others, like Huskies tend to prefer to be outside, but they are well suited for the outdoors. Oh, this is a funny one. They could be escape artists. They just can get out of the house, and they can get out of their, yard, their fenced in area. Some dogs can jump fences really high, so maybe that's why they have them tied up. And or this really sad thing would be they're just not wanted, which would be, that's not great, because why would they have a dog if they don't want it and they just leave it outside all the time? Yes, Allison.
I feel though, like some of those examples you give just pretty much says that you shouldn't be a dog owner in the first place.
Good
If
point.
you're not going to put in the effort, or yeah.
Yep. That's a great point. Very good observation. Yes.
Something dog is commitment.
It's a big commitment to have a dog. Yep, you're right. So by offering the dog owner these solutions to some of the challenges that they might have with the dog, you can offer assistance in building a fence. Maybe they don't have enough money to put a fence, but maybe that would really help, and then the dog wouldn't have to be on a chain. Training tips or rehoming assistance. Sometimes they're afraid to give up the dog, but offering, maybe we can find a new home for the dog that might be best. And then there's lots of training things you can do with your animals to teach them to go to the bathroom outside. But all these things can really save the dog's life. So it's very important. Another thing, this is kind of another way you can go, is to contact the media, because then it becomes aware to the general public. You can write a letter to the editor of the newspaper. Those are very common. And so whatever your local paper might be, you could write a letter to the editor concerning the plight of the chained dog. And you can also call your local television station to let them know, so that maybe they can share something on that. And then the last thing would be the political route. Many communities and states have already restricted or outlawed chaining as a means of confinement. So when you contact your community leaders and your state legislators, you can ask them to help pass any anti-tethering law specific to the community. All right. So, and do we have any more questions on that? Or Jane, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you've covered it very, very well, Maggie. I think, going through all of those steps, there are things that each and every one of you can do, and you can educate your friends, tell your friends that these are things that they can do to help animals when they see maybe this kind of abuse going on.
Yeah, so we have a few slides on some of those more specific pieces of legislation. So Jane, do you want to just run through those kind of briefly, just to give everyone an idea more specifically about them, and then that way we can have time for the volunteer and the action piece at the end, which I'm sure everyone's excited about. Okay.
Absolutely. Great. I will go through these fairly quickly. Okay. I think that these laws that we have chosen to highlight are among the more recent and probably among the more important. The next slide that Maggie's going to put up for you is about legislative piece, our law number 535 in the state of Maine. And this, as you can see, is an act to provide for the well-being of companion animals upon the dissolution of marriage. That's kind of a wordy way of saying that now animals are not just considered property. Like in a divorce, who's going to get the dining room set? Who's going to get the big TV? In a divorce, obviously, you have to decide which parent or both parents are going to assume custody of the children from the marriage. Is the custody joint custody? Does the mother get the children? Does the father become the primary custodian? Now, with this piece of legislation that we proposed and that has been passed into law, we're able to provide court advocates to make sure that there is justice for the animal in terms of who is going to maintain custody. Um, I have a casual friend that I see at my dentist's office once in a while. She is divorced. She and her husband her ex-husband came to a very happy agreement in their divorce settlement. And legally, they have joint custody of their poodle, Mina. And she gets weekends with her dad and weekdays with her mom. If a family can't come to an amicable or friendly solution, we have volunteer attorneys, including second and third year law student volunteers, who are available to the court to provide information to help the court decide which partner in the dissolution of a marriage should properly maintain care for the animal. So it's a voice, in other words, for the animal. The next law that is a very important law is what Maggie referenced earlier as the second state in the nation to enact this this provision. The dog Frankie, for which the law is affectionately named, was a beautiful pug that was kidnapped in Winter Harbor, Maine, and tortured and shot and ultimately drowned. And this law provides court-appointed advocates for the animal who will speak for the animal in cases of extreme abuse. Maggie, you maybe have some more details available that you want to add to this and to the prior slide for that matter.
Yeah, no, I think these are great. Yeah, so this law gives animals in these sorts of cases a voice in the court, basically. So so they get the proper justice.
Exactly.
Because that's not really fair. Yeah, it's not fair to mistreat people, and it's not fair to mistreat animals. So
that's wrong. It's like the person that shot this dog and abused it doesn't give a damn about it, only himself, you know? So
You're right.
I'm wondering if maybe the dog, even though he drowned, I wonder if he's still alive or is he dead?
The dog is dead, and very ironically, the attorney who brought the case against the perpetrator, the man who shot Frankie, that attorney was at the beach near Winter Harbor and actually discovered Frankie's body when it washed up. And he is the attorney who then prosecuted the abuser. And sadly, the dog did die, but justice was established in Frankie's name, and the law is now known as Frankie's Law. This law is, as I mentioned before, and Maggie mentioned earlier on, only the second such law in the country, and Maine modeled our law after a similar statute in the state of Connecticut. In Connecticut, it's called Desmond's Law for a similar situation where the dog Desmond was brutally abused. And in forming this law and bringing it to the state legislature in Maine, we worked very closely with the state of Connecticut to pattern our law after theirs. So we're really proud of this. It's a very important statute.
it is. Yeah. All right. And then we've got the next one.
LD 1311, as Maggie said, was passed in the legislature originally and vetoed by the governor of the state of Maine. It was subsequently reintroduced in the next session and was signed by Governor Janet Mills. And this eliminates any pet shops selling dogs and cats in the state of Maine, with the exception of 3 pet shops which were grandfathered in. But those pet shops, when the last dog and the last cat is sold, can no longer sell any other dogs and cats, and the business itself can only be sold to a family member. But the sale of dogs and cats in pet shops is not the heart of the problem. The heart of the problem is puppy mills, which ruthlessly breed over and over and over to sell to pet shops. By stopping the availability of the sale venue, the pet shop, many puppy mills across the country have been shut down where these laws are in effect. And this is a very important law.
Yeah, because we don't need lots and lots of more cats and dogs. We already have enough, and all the ones in the shelters, they all need homes. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and it's not fair to the animals to keep breeding them over and over and over again. That's a lot. Did Allison, did you have
Diseases. They could
Oh.
have diseases.
Yes. Yep. That is
Yeah.
a huge issue. Good point. Yes.
I was just gonna say it makes me think and not to pin a group of people, but there's a lot of Amish in my area that sell puppies like immensely. Like poor dog is pregnant as soon as they can be pregnant, essentially. And they're selling these dogs. So yeah, and it's hard because but that's fantastic though, because a lot of times I know they would sell to pet shops in other states and stuff. So once you take out that, it does help reduce the number of dogs that are being bred. Yeah. Which puts a dog at risk anyway. So I was gonna say a lot of breeding them. Yeah. There's a lot of complications around that. So yeah, I think it's fantastic work. But yeah, unfortunately it's still something we see today.
It is. Yeah, very good point. Hannah, do you have a question?
Hannah, I think you're muted, but once you unmute, Hannah might have to be your last question just because we're running out of time.
Yeah, well, mine is more of a comment than question. I was gonna say I got my cat from a shelter.
Oh, great.
Good for you.
Very good. All right, Jane.
And because we are tight on time, I will just cover this last piece of legislation. Notice that this is LR. LD means that the law has already been passed, is enacted. LR means that it is currently under consideration in the legislature, but has not yet passed. And this is a law that we are proposing in this session. It's called canned hunting. And this is a terrible, terrible thing where deer and elk and bears and even moose can be put in a small area contained by a fence, barbed wire, whatever, and hunters who are not really hunters go in, and for a certain set fee, it's usually very expensive, it can be several $1,000s, get to shoot an animal that has no possibility of escape because it is entrapped in an enclosed area. It's a terrible, terrible thing, and we want to see it outlawed in the state of Maine. So watch your local newspapers and watch your TV stations, because Maine is known as a big hunting state, and hunters and the hunting lobby in this state are very vocal. Many hunters are opposed to this because it really isn't hunting. It isn't fair to the animal, and it's not a test of anybody's skill. So there are some hunters in the state of Maine who are very supportive of this law, and we are hoping to engage them in testimony before the legislature. And I'm going to throw this back to Maggie, who is our director of volunteers, and she can take the next slide, and then we'll try to wrap up quickly with some ideas that you all can do.
That's perfect.
Okay, great. So I am the volunteer director, and this is a new role for me. And it's also a program that we are trying to revamp after COVID, a lot of shutdown of events. So we are working to get ourselves back out there, but we have several categories that volunteers can sign up for. So I'll just run through them quickly. We table at events, writing legislators and newspapers about important topics, planning fundraisers and helping us find donors. There's lots of assisting on various projects in the office. And then we have several programs that we sometimes need help with. Planning local events. There's always lots of things to do. And then demonstrations and rallies. So those are our topics. And then I'm just going to switch to the next slide because this is the area, the shelter in the area of Blue Hill. So it's the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals of Hancock County. And some things that you all can do to help would be to hold fundraisers. That is one idea that we had. And you don't necessarily have to be in any particular place to do this. This can be done from anywhere. So we have a few different topics for fundraiser ideas: collecting pet food for your local shelter, whatever the shelter might be in your area. You can help, ask for donations of pet food and then bring it to the shelter. They always need food, lots of animals to feed. You can have a bike or a walkathon. Those are really fun. You can ask for item donations to create an online auction, and then the money from the auction could go to your local shelter. You can ask your local businesses to set up collection jars. A lot of times when you check out at a store, there's a little jar for the local Humane Society, and you just put your change in there. That's really great.
And that's an easy one to do. You could do that anywhere.
Yep, that's a very easy one. You can design the jar and do all kinds of fun artwork on it. That's a really great one. You can create a sponsor a pet monthly campaign. There might be like a particular animal at your local shelter that may have been in the shelter for a certain amount of time. We just had that here in Maine, and so maybe that's the pet of the month that gets a spotlight. And then so the local press in Blue Hill is the Penobscot Bay Press. So I did link to that there, but they can help publicize any efforts that you might have. So whoever your local press is, you can contact them. And then, what types of events might you guys be able to come up with? So you can kind of think what might be unique to NatureLink, and maybe you guys can have a separate class on some, fun ideas for fundraisers in your local areas.
That is a great idea. I love all of these too. It gives us a lot to think and talk about for the future.
One last thing that I want to add to that collection of great ideas that Maggie just shared with you is that most TV stations that are affiliates like ABC, CBS, NBC, by law have to do a certain amount of public service announcement time in order to maintain their license. So if you have a local TV station, be sure that you approach them. If they don't have a pet spotlight that they pick up once or twice a week, encourage them to do that. Encourage them to go to the local shelter in your community and have them do a pet spotlight. And if they do that once a week, that'll help the shelter too.